Hey everyone, and welcome to This Explainer. Today we're going to unpack what is arguably one of the most incredible, jaw-dropping stories in modern financial history. We are diving deep into the complete collapse of Lehman Brothers. This was an institution that survived 2 world wars and the Great Depression. It had been around forever, yet it was ultimately brought down by its very own hand.
Just listen to these words. Our global platform is stronger and more balanced than ever. That quote is straight from Lehman's CEO, Richard Fuld, in an official SEC filing from June 2007. I really want you to let the absolute, unwavering confidence of that statement sink in. He's literally telling the world and all of his investors that Lehman Brothers is totally invincible.
But here is the chilling reality. Just over a single year after making that bold statement, this 158-year-old financial titan would file for the largest bankruptcy in United States history. How do you go from stronger than ever to completely erased from existence in a matter of months? Well, let's follow the data and find out.
Okay, Section 1, Peak of the Illusion.
$1.3 billion. That wasn't their profit for the decade, or even the year. That was Lehman Brothers' record-breaking net income for the second quarter of 2007 alone. When you're posting over $1 billion in profit in a single quarter, well, it's pretty easy for the market, the regulators, and even your own executives to totally buy into that illusion of invincibility. The official SEC data from 2007 paints a pretty crazy picture. Net revenues were up 25%, hitting a staggering $5.5 billion, and net income was up 27%. We're talking massive, double-digit growth across the board. On paper, they were basically printing money. Which brings us to Section 2, the fatal subprime bet. Beneath that incredibly shiny surface of record profits, a ticking time bomb was quietly counting down. Let's trace how they actually built this trap. Lehman didn't just casually invest in the housing market. No, starting back in 2003, they launched this super aggressive wave of acquisitions, just buying up specialized subprime mortgage lenders. They wanted to own the entire risky supply chain. So they originated the loans, packaged them up into complex stuff like mortgage-backed securities and CDOs, and then sold them off globally. They effectively became the biggest holder of these securities on Wall Street, betting the entire farm that U.S. housing prices would just never, ever fall. Now, to fuel this massive real estate machine, they obviously needed cash. And this introduces the true villain of our story, the leverage ratio. The concept is actually really simple. It's just how much borrowed money a company is using compared to its actual real equity. The higher the number, the more borrowed money you're playing with, and naturally, the higher the risk. The historical filings show exactly how this risk compounded year over year. In 2003, they were leveraged at 25.4 times, which is already really high, right? But watch how it just creeps up steadily. By 2007, their leverage ratio hit a terrifying 28.6 times. To put that into perspective, for every $1 real of their own capital, they were borrowing and investing almost $29. So here's where the math becomes absolutely crucial. At a 28.6 leverage ratio, a mere 4% drop in the value of their assets completely wipes out the company's real capital. They were walking a microscopic tightrope over a massive canyon. Even the absolute gentlest breeze in the housing market was going to be lethal. And that leads us to Section 3, deaf to the alarms. Because that deadly breeze, it was already starting to blow. But the real tragedy of Lehman Brothers, actually, scratch that, it wasn't just a bad bet. It's that they were totally deaf to the alarms blaring all around them. The warnings were everywhere. Internally, top risk experts set strict limits, but upper management just bypassed them like they didn't exist. The SEC actually knew Lehman was exceeding risk limits but didn't issue any formal warnings. The Office of Thrift Supervision did finally issue a warning report about their exaggerated real estate bets, but that arrived just 2 months before the collapse. Way too late. And internally, they were using controversial accounting gimmicks to hide their debt. One senior executive literally described these practices in an email as another drug we're on. And the sheer hubris is just mind-blowing. Even as the massive cracks in the housing market became undeniable to everyone else, Lehman actually kept buying more real estate assets straight into the first quarter of 2008. The ship was actively taking on water, and their brilliant solution was to drill more holes in the bottom. So, Section 4, the market finally cracks. Because eventually reality always catches up and the illusion completely shatters. And man, did it unravel fast.
In mid-2007, U.S. housing prices stalled and then started dropping. Subprime borrowers started defaulting. Then, in March 2008, a massive wake-up call hits Wall Street. Bear Stearns collapses and is sold off with Federal Reserve backing. By the second quarter of 2008, Lehman's toxic assets finally caught up to them, forcing them to report a $2.8 billion quarterly loss. That was their first quarterly loss since they spun off from American Express way back in 1994.
But unlike Bear Stearns, there was absolutely no safety net waiting to catch Lehman. The message from U.S. Treasury Secretary Henry Paulson to CEO Richard Fuld was crystal clear. No government bailout is coming. You must find a solution yourself. The government was officially washing its hands of the situation.
At that point, the market smelled blood in the water. In the span of just one single year, Lehman Brothers stock lost an unfathomable 94% of its value. Think about that. The confidence that took 158 years to build was wiped out in roughly 12 months, setting the stage for a desperate, frantic scramble to survive.
Which brings us to our final act, Section 5, the final rescues fail.
We've reached the climax, the final chaotic weekend where every single lifeline just snapped. On Friday, September 12, 2008, the president of the New York Fed, Timothy Geithner, calls this massive emergency meeting. He literally gathers the leaders of Wall Street's biggest banks in one room. The goal? Find a private buyer for Lehman Brothers before the markets open on Monday morning, or sit back and watch the entire financial system burn. Time was completely out. Two potential saviors emerged that weekend, but both doors slammed completely shut. Bank of America was seriously interested, but they demanded government guarantees to cover Lehman's massive toxic risks. The U.S. Treasury flat out denied the request, so Bank of America walked away to go buy Merrill Lynch instead. Then you had the British bank, Barclays. A deal was so close to being finalized, but at the absolute last minute, UK regulators refused to approve it without a formal shareholder vote. And a vote takes time. Time that Lehman simply didn't have. Denied again. Sunday evening falls on September 14th. The Barclays deal is dead. The room is completely out of buyers, and the U.S. government holds absolutely firm on its refusal to intervene. That microscopic tightrope Lehman had been walking for 5 years. It finally snapped. There was no way out. At exactly 1:45 a.m. on Monday, September 15th, 2008, Lehman Brothers officially filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. The unthinkable had actually happened. And the collapse of this one firm didn't just happen in a vacuum, right? It triggered a massive global financial earthquake that infected the entire world economy. It shattered the illusion once and for all that any institution, no matter its history, its wealth, or its prestige, is ever too established to fail. So we've seen the data, we've seen the warnings they deliberately ignored, and we've seen the incredibly devastating math of extreme leverage, which leaves us with this final thought to take away from our explainer today. If a 158-year-old giant that survived world wars could be entirely erased overnight just because of unchecked risk, who in our financial system is truly safe today? Definitely something to keep in mind the next time you see a market roaring upwards. Thank you so much for joining me, and I'll see you on the next explainer.